So Karen Peabody O'Brien, before founding Advancing Green Chemistry, was the program manager at the American Chemical Society's Green Chemistry Institute. She co-founded the Ingenuity Project at the Darden Graduate School of Business Administration at the University of Virginia, and she was also program officer for New Ventures at the W. Alton Jones Foundation, which is a private philanthropy focused on environmental issues and nuclear nonproliferation. So she also initiated and oversaw the foundation's Megacities and Sustainable Transportation Initiative, which was an international project spanning cities in the U.S., Asia, and Latin America. So her background, just as a final note, is interdisciplinary, approaching political and economic development, and she has a PhD in political science from Columbia University. I hope you've had an opportunity to check out the Advancing Green Chemistry website, which is really terrific and has a lot of great information beyond just what we'll be talking about today. Our other speaker is Pete Myers, whom we're very lucky to have today. He's the founder and CEO of Environmental Health Sciences, and probably a lot of you get environmental health news, and you can get the feed on our website with articles specific to green chemistry. And that's an Environmental Health Sciences organization engaged in advancing public understanding of environmental links to health. And it's really a terrific resource. So I really encourage you, if you haven't looked at it, to be sure to go and take a peek. Pete is also the senior advisor to Commonweal and to the Jennifer Altman Foundation on environmental threats to children's health. He also served as the director of the W. Alton Jones Foundation, and his prior posts include senior vice president for science at the National Audubon Society and many other positions at that level to promote research on environmental issues. Along with co-authors Dr. Theo Colburn and Diane Dumansky, he wrote Our Stolen Future, which is also an outstanding book that I also recommend to all of you. So I'm going to turn it over to our speakers now to present our webinar. And again, we will unmute you when the time comes to ask questions, and you can always type in your questions in the interim. Thanks.
Great.
Take it away, Karen and Pete.
Thank you, Lynn. That was a lovely, very kind introduction, and we're delighted to be here. Poor Lynn keeps assigning me titles that I keep changing. And we're at the Green Chemistry and Engineering Conference at the annual meeting last week, and I did the same thing in a session that she had planned, but she's a great sport about these things. But Lynn's right. I mean, the original title was Design Signals from the Environmental Health Sciences to Green Chemistry, and that's exactly what we're talking about. We have just sort of delved into it in such a way that could help you guys get your arms around what the mechanisms are and what some of the ways in which these design signals are being brought into chemistry and hopefully inspiring innovation. So, and what I'd like to focus on is the word collaborations in the title that we've changed it to, Catalyzing Green Chemistry Innovation through Key Collaborations. Lynn mentioned that I worked for a while at the Darden School of Business, and what we worked on there, we were focusing on the process of innovation, business innovation, and how do new ideas get translated into product. And one could also look at the sciences and ask the same questions. How does innovation happen in such a way that's tangible? And one of the most interesting areas of research was looking at collaborations and looking at unusual partnerships. This was borrowed from sociology, particularly a man named Mark Granovetter, who was talking about soft ties. So hard ties are the people that you know and that you see all the time, people you work with, people that you socialize with. Soft ties are to people who are not in your normal network. And one of the interesting things that is coming out of sociology and that is applicable to business and to science is that innovation really happens, radical innovation happens through these soft ties. You get a perspective that you would not otherwise get, and that's what we're talking about today. Change for you? Did you guys see the slide change?
Yeah.
Collectively nod. Okay. Briefly, what is green chemistry? We are a catalyst, and in that we are hopefully causing reactions to happen, inspiring reactions to happen, change to happen, but not being consumed in that process, and hopefully inspiring things that would not otherwise take place to happen. And what that means in practice is we are looking for places to try to shift things forwards faster. Trying to apply strategic pressure to places where you can minimal amount of resources make something move. And often what that has come to mean for us is trying to find places in which there, people identify or talk about barriers a lot to green chemistry, but we're trying to find places where, where are some places that are some opportunities where you could build capacity to help shift the field forward in ways that we would all like to see. One of the areas that we're going to talk about today, in which we've been working with the environmental health sciences, and which inspired the partnership between my organization and Pete's, we've been calling cross-pollination between green chemistry and environmental health sciences. And another area which is related is in science communication. And I'm going to ask Pete, or invite Pete, to describe a little bit his organization.
Quite briefly, environmental health sciences is all about advancing public understanding of new discoveries in the environmental health sciences. We publish environmental health news and daily climate. We help scientists work with reporters. We do a lot of work tracking what are the emerging trends in the science and figuring out how to make that information available to the public.
All right, thank you. So to focus on the one of those two projects, we're going to sort of divide the talk into two areas. One is cross-pollinating, and the other is looking at science communication. So cross-pollinating between these two fields. In a nutshell, what we're trying to do, if we're asking green chemists to help us move forward into the next generation of inherently sustainable materials, they need to understand not only toxicology that has gone to in recent years past, but really the cutting edge of toxicology. And as you all have undoubtedly heard John Warner say many times, it is the unusual chemist who's ever been exposed to toxicology in their education. And so what we're trying to do is really sort of jumpstart or to end run the holes in education and help start building connections between the fields.
One of the things we'd like to emphasize is that we have deep respect for all the remarkable research that's gone on in toxicology for the last 100 years. There really has been some major changes in the last 15 as molecular genetics has worked its way into the process. And unfortunately, a lot of the standardized assays that are depended upon by regulatory agencies haven't kept up with that avalanche of scientific discovery. And so we are putting our focus on making those cutting-edge discoveries accessible to the green chemistry community as it goes about its design work.
So, and I mentioned when we began this that we're looking at soft ties as a source of innovation and leaping forward in innovation and creativity. One way that we've been doing this is trying to build networks, build personal connections across the fields through a series of meetings that we've had over the last 4 years to try to create new sort of partnerships. Chemists are not, they can't be responsible for the whole ball. It's only going to work if there are teams. So we've been trying to put together what we see as some of the leading team members from multiple disciplines to make this happen. And then obviously what that would lead to is inspiring new research agendas, but not just in green chemistry, as we've been finding increasingly as different people from different fields talk to one another. It's actually inspiring new research agendas within the environmental health sciences as well. It's pretty cool to watch that transaction take place. And then as we've been moving forward in this, we're focusing increasingly on developing concrete tools that green chemists can use to go back to the lab then and test what they're doing to see to what degree is the thing that they are working on currently. Can we say with some confidence that it is not an endocrine disruption, and can we disruptor and move forward into commerce with that? And there's many collaborations already underway, in both directions. We've got green chemists asking for help from the environmental health scientists to test what they've got in their hands right now that they're working on. We also have had environmental health scientists asking the chemists for help to help them test things in ways that only the chemists know how to do. So just a brief, sort of a small subset of the people who've been involved over the past 4 years. Just you can find your favorite green chemist or your favorite environmental health scientist. We've got folks from a great variety of fields involved in it, and it's been a really terrific set of meetings, and it's starting to transfer into some very concrete outcomes. Here we are collaborating. This is a meeting that took place a couple years ago in Erice, Italy. I won't elaborate, but it was a lovely, productive group. So the concrete tools that we are focusing on is designing endocrine disruption, the tools to design endocrine disruption out of the next generation of materials. And that has sort of two parts to it, two outputs. One is a design protocol, which we'll go into detail and discuss. And the other is a series of publications that explain the principles behind the science of endocrine disruption. And just briefly, Pete's going to talk a little bit more about endocrine disruption and why specifically we focused on that, but just to give you guys a little sense of what our process is in designing a protocol and where the outcomes are trending, I thought we'd start with that. I mentioned this is unusual partners. These are the collaboration of people between biology, toxicology, chemistry, epigenetics. It's a wide net of people from different fields. And this is the point I mentioned earlier is you're trying to give chemists a place in which they can examine what they're doing upstream and decide, is this something that's hazardous that I don't want to work on anymore, or should I go back and change certain things about it? And we want to emphasize, as I haven't mentioned yet, but this isn't a regulatory tool, this is a design tool. This is something that's looking ahead towards next generation materials. It's not looking backwards at the 80,000 existing chemicals in commerce, but it's really a way to give chemists a chance to be confident in what they're doing going forward. Setting the course. Obviously, Pete and I can't do this all by ourselves, so we have engaged a science advisory board to help us oversee the process and to help sort of design the path forward, as well as the peer review process that will ensue, et cetera. And so this is our science advisory board members who have been just terrifically helpful. We have, we were thinking we'd have a conference call every other month or something, but they have insisted on conference calls every other week for the past, gosh, almost a year now. So it's been just a terrific, energetic group. We've been working closely, especially with the NIEHS, the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. We've also been discussing with EPA, trying to make sure that we are integrating with some of the new tools coming through from them. And there's just so that you all can put this on your calendar, there's a National Academy of Sciences meeting scheduled in September of 2012 that's going to be looking at an aspect of this. We don't have the agenda at this point, but it's coming. I'm sorry, 2011. Did I say that wrong? Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a mistake. It should be 2011, not 2012. And here we are collaborating again. Most recently, we had when we were discussing this design protocol, we had a meeting in California, in Sausalito at Cavallo Point, which is a gorgeous place that if you guys ever have to have a meeting, I highly recommend it. But we had a really brilliant couple of days where people sat around the table, and after having spent this whole year of phone calls getting ready to bring this work to the table, then we expanded the group to include other folks and to start talking about how do you put the flesh on the bones of this. How do you design a protocol to test for endocrine disruption?
On endocrine disruption, really for two reasons. Any of you have heard Terry Collins speak about this will know that he considers EDCs as one of the principal challenges facing the design process in green chemistry. And the reason is that this new generation of science has revealed that EDCs can have profound effects at low doses that play out over a lifetime, and that often have characteristics that are not amenable to discovery by traditional toxicological explorations. It's tough. We decided to choose not only a very important suite of chemicals, but also ones that really represent one of the toughest challenges today in the business. EDCs are important because of their implication in a wide range of health effects. Lots of uncertainty there, but also a lot of information suggesting they are major contributors to human health burdens. Finally, the last reason why we chose EDCs was that the EPA was charged with doing this 20 years ago and still hasn't been successful at developing the right research protocols within a regulatory process. We thought that it might be interesting to do this if we restrict it to the design process, don't impose upon it the burden of meeting regulatory standards. We could get the ball rolling that ultimately could help inform EPA's considerations.
And just give you a sense of sort of the range of...
EDCs are quite common in commerce.
They're everywhere.
Unfortunately, a number of notable examples of how we've allowed them to enter into common materials that are in everyone's households and create exposures that at least the animal science indicates are very likely to be contributing to significant human health burdens.
So, to go back to where where we're thinking in terms of the protocol, I mean, essentially what we're trying to put together, if you bring the leading scientists from this field around a table, what tests would they all identify that would help determine whether this is an EDC? It has to be logical, it has to be easy to follow, this has to be something practical. This is something that the chemists in our process have constantly brought us back to the table saying, you have to make this something that chemists can use in the lab.
And I should point out that while most people, when they think about EDCs, they focus on the steroid hormones, specifically estrogen and androgen and testosterone, actually we're attempting in this effort to encompass a much broader array of endocrine signaling mechanisms that now clearly are vulnerable to disruption by a wide array of chemicals. So going into much more than just estrogens and androgens.
Right. Also have to apologize, Lynn, I caught your cold at GC&E. I'm blaming you. So, okay, so we're talking it's got to be sound, it's got, what's the consensus in the leaders in the field? It's got to be logical, it has to be something people can do. It has to be something that's not expensive, right? Or it has to be aware of expense, all right? So that leads us to the tiered approach. What we agreed to as an approach as we got this group together is that it made most sense to start with something cheapest and easiest and then build your way up through a series of tiers of tests, ending up with the most expensive, the most fine-tuned, the most precise. And yes?
And what we're trying to do is set in motion a process that, in essence, allows a green chemist to, using those initial cheap, simple, quick entries, make a decision, do I work with this compound further, or do I just put it back on the shelf?
Or do I change it?
Or do I change it? And then going through the tiers, as it passes additional levels of tests and its material characteristics look more and more interesting as commercial possibility, then the chemist and his or her company is more likely to be able to spend more money to investigate the next level of testing.
Right. And importantly, there's no requirement that you start at level 1 and go to level 5. If someone wants to start at level 5, great. There's this, it's not a regulatory process, so it's how people design, how they decide they need to use it. And so obviously this isn't something that you can't write this in stone. Science is moving forward so rapidly. This has to be something that is elastic and that adapts and that constantly is, or not constantly, but over time is improved and new science is brought into it. So we mentioned it was a tiered testing system. This is one way in which it's been conceptualized, and you can think of it as a line or you can think of it as a circle, depending on how you want to organize your thoughts. But at phase 1, one might start with a computational or a QSAR type model, looking at using computer in silico models to try to sort of guesstimate, given what we know about other chemicals, does this one look like it? Phase 2 might be something that was in vitro or looking at cell-based assays. Phase 3 moving into whole cell type of systems. Phase 4 looking at fish or amphibian strains. And Phase 5 is working with mammals, if people so choose. Obviously there's issues with working with animals, and one can choose to go that way or not. And this is where we are now. Right now we're sort of a year into this process. We're thinking it's probably another year, and then we will be at a place where something's much more concrete. We're working on the consensus statement right now on the principles and guidelines. We are basically fleshing out the testing protocol as we speak. That's what we're doing right now with our planning process with our science advisory board. And this is the write-up at the NIEHS. This is one of their in-house publications with one of our partners from NIEHS wrote this up and had it put in. And the whole reason this slide is here, so you can see the pictures of, on the left is Terry Collins, and on the right is John Warner, both well-known green chemists, as you know. And in the middle is Jerry Heindel, who's a bureau chief at NIEHS. And we had an icebreaker the first evening out at our last meeting of a cooking class. And we wanted people to roll their sleeves up and get dirty and start collaborating on projects right away. I'm going to let Pete talk about this a little bit because Lynn's cold is hurting my voice. So
another area of collaboration that environmental health sciences has with chemistry is in training the next generation of scientists to be more effective at communicating to a broader audience what their results are and working with the media to help advance public understanding of these issues. This has been running now for 5 years. It's a collaboration between AGC, Environmental Health Sciences, and the Science Communication Network. Each year we receive nominations from the major research universities around the country. Actually now we have European and Canadian participants also. 10 fellows each year are selected by an eminent group of on our nominating committee. And then we have an annual meeting with them where we bring in a group of policymakers and journalists and scientists to help them understand first how science is used in policy, and second, what are some of the pitfalls in that process and how can they be more effective at contributing to it. We then have monthly calls involving the 10 fellows. This year we have 2 green chemists and 8 environmental health sciences scientists. And we spend an hour and a half every month coaching them about being more effective in their presentations to the general public and to reporters.
And here we are communicating.
Those are 2 of this year's fellows at our annual meeting in Washington, which took place in March. Nominations for the 2012 process are just about to open. It is a competitive process. We want to have a balance of green chemists and environmental health science. It's been very interesting. Not only are they learning how to be more effective at communicating with reporters, but they're also building bridges across these 2 disciplines. We're really interested in helping this next generation of leadership develop those skill sets and develop those contacts across the sciences. Lynn mentioned Environmental Health News. Here is a screenshot of what it was looking like a few days ago, 21st of June. I should point out that in the down there in the middle, there's a new science section. This is written by our Science Communication Fellows. On this particular day, we had 2 showing up, one from one of the environmental health sciences scientists and one from one of our green chemists. They then, those short synopses on the front page link to much deeper explorations of new scientific publications, with the goal being that the fellows write it in a fashion and a style that's accessible to reporters. We actually find many reporters turning to them and developing them as contacts for help in covering subsequent science.
And thank you for listening to us. And we also have to thank our funders who are supporting these projects, who are listed here. And I put both of Pete's website and ours if you wanted to pursue any of those things we were talking about. So thanks for listening. I guess we can open for questions, Lynn?
Yeah, Lynn, this is Bill. We have two questions so far, one from Barbara Warren. So, Barb, I've just unmuted you if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question. Still on? Not getting a reply. Maybe a technical difficulty, or she may have.
Yeah, it was a, let's see. Her question was, let's see. In silico, I'm not sure if I'm not familiar with that. Offers speed for lots of quick tests. In view of the wide array of endocrine disruptors and endpoints signaled in the definition, in which areas are in silico best developed, most promising, and in which is more work needed? And I think that's from Rich Leroff.
Okay, great. Well, in silico is obscure jargon for let the computer do the work, don't bother to go to the laboratory.
Okay.
It's, using computer modeling or statistical calculations. It's something a chemist or an environmental scientist can do at their desk based on previous analyses. That's a very good question, Rich, because the art of in silico assessment of endocrine disruption is not very far advanced, frankly. There's been a lot of work on quantitative structural relationships, activity relationships, in specifically dealing with estrogens. But when you start to veer away from estrogens, there's much less work. And this is one of the reasons why we emphasize this is a process that we are designing from the outset to be able to learn from new science. We don't want to get locked into the, I think, the problem that has vexed the regulatory process that depends upon standardized assays that often are a couple decades out of date. But the reason we're acutely aware of the fact that the in silico stuff is not going to do everything. And one of the interesting research questions that we've identified in this exploration is what are the areas in which in silico analyses, computer analyses, where are they likely to produce false negatives? And it turns out no one has really looked at that as systematically as they should. It's one of the crucial reasons why we believe a tiered approach is essential. No one of these analyses is going to get everything. I hope that made sense.
Bob, can you unmute everybody? There should be a way to do that so that people can jump in. Barbara said she wasn't unmuted, so.
Oh, okay. See what I can do here.
And in the meantime, we have.
Okay, that's the problem when you unmute people.
Okay,
so,
well.
So that was Terry's line for some reason.
Hi, Terry.
So let me try Barb again.
Yeah, try Barbara.
Hello?
Okay, Barbara, you should be unmuted.
Hello?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. I guess I was headed toward that, the structural relationships also is that, what do we know about how many false negatives would we be getting on that? Or do we or is that quantified yet?
Well, that's exactly what I was just commenting on. We know that there are lots of holes in this level of science right now, which is exactly why we're not stopping there. We think it will identify some. And so if you identify, the way to think about it is, first of all, remember, this is not about regulations. This is about helping chemists decide whether or not they want to spend more time and more resources on a specific chemical. And so if you run it through the QSARs or another in silico approach, and you get a response saying, well, it's highly likely that that's an estrogen, then that helps the chemist decide, maybe I just don't want to mess around with that. If you get a negative, Then you move to a next tier, which is going to be looking at additional types of endpoints, but is also going to be more costly. So you postpone the most expensive until you get far down the design process where you're more confident that it's going to be worth your while to invest additional resources in additional testing.
Okay, so there's not going to be an assumption that then it's safe because it came up negative.
No, no. If it comes up negative, it gets tested at the next level.
Okay.
So there were also
Just as a good example of some of the weaknesses of QSAR, you look at the structure of the estrogen receptor and the structure of other estrogens, and there's no way that predicts that the element uranium would be an estrogen, and yet uranium does act as an estrogen. So that's a clear weakness in the QSARs as they currently stand.
So there are a couple of other written questions. Can you guys see the written questions on your screen? You should be able to. You should be able to.
Hi, Lynn. Can you call in on the phone? There's a lot of stuff written there. I don't know.
Yeah, but there's Rich asked the same question about multi-cell testing, 96 fluorescent dishes at a time, the ToxCast type of stuff. Yeah, so that's his question. He's not on the phone. He's just listening to his computer.
So who is that, Lynn?
That was Rich again, following up with if you would answer the question in the same way for, as you did with the in silico, for the multi-cell testing.
For ToxCast type approaches where you're using in vitro high throughput in vitro screening, yes, that method is intriguing. It was invented, pioneered in the pharmacological community for detecting big effects because you want to find molecules that are very effective at changing something in a person's biology. It turns out that flipping it and using it to detect perhaps less big but still important effects in toxicology is more challenging than people might have thought at the outset. So we think it's definitely worth exploring. It's definitely worth using, but don't put all your eggs in that basket.
There's another question. Given the diverse chemical structure of known EDCs, they are all over the map in terms of sharing common features. How comfortable are you of success?
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Glad to have you ask that question because it's right at the heart of this, and it's an empirical question. And that's why it's not an overnight exercise to build an array that's we're confident is sufficient. We think we can narrow the chances that a compound is likely to be an endocrine disruptor. We also know that right now we don't have all the tests available for asking all the possible mechanisms. This is a work in progress, but we figured it'd be better to start, build it, see where the gaps are, see where the likely false negatives are, and in the process help green chemists narrow the chances that they're working with something problematic. It's not perfect, but it's so much better than anything that's being done today. We figured it's worth the effort.
So Bev has a question. Bev Thorpe, is there a list of the 1,000 EDCs? Where can we find it?
Yeah, Theo put one up on our website in collaboration with ChemSec from Europe.
Theo Colborn.
Theo Colborn, excuse me. So that would be the place to look right now.
And there's a follow-up question from Dave. What about modification of existing EDCs with commercial applications to lose the EDC component?
That's a very interesting possibility. Part of this process is not just steering chemists away from things that clearly are problematic, but as the mechanistic understanding advances of how it is that this or that chemical causes the problems that it causes and how it interacts with biological systems, whether it be a new chemical or an existing chemical, green chemists can begin to use that mechanistic information to begin to tweak molecular structures and ask, can I maintain the material characteristics that I want while eliminating through design, molecular design changes, the hazardous characteristics? Again, that's an empirical question, and it's one we are very interested in exploring. We definitely don't present this as something that's finished. No. It's a work in progress, and it's going to be hard work to carry it to a point that it's operational.
That's all of the, oh, there's another hand raised. Let's see. I think Rich has another.
We have a question from Megan with her hand raised.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Am I really unmuted?
You're really unmuted.
Really unmuted.
Hi, Meg Schwarzman at UC Berkeley. Thanks for the presentation. I'm curious to hear, you know, we're working in the curriculum development here on figuring out these kinds of issues about how you can train chemists to think about toxicity without trying to undertake the process of doing. One is working on sort of figuring out what are the relevant tests with regard to endocrine disruption in terms of informing new chemical design. The other is making green chemists aware of that evidence and working with them to learn to understand it. But you used some description during the presentation about, for example, a chemist doing a test and that providing, you know, real-time, which is ideal, indication of whether they should continue pursuing the kind of design that they're doing or head in a different direction or alter the compound they're working with. So can you say something about ideally what you would like to see in terms of who's performing these tests? Are you hoping ultimately to develop tools that chemists could use in the lab, or simply to understand computer modeling tools that would be developed? Where do you think this should lie, or what's the nearest term sort of help for a chemist in a lab, and what belongs still with the toxicologist?
Excellent question. We think that there's a reasonable chance that some of the computer analyses will be doable by the chemists using tools and concepts and parameters that they are intimately familiar with. In fact, perhaps more familiar than the biologists. Adelina Vuchkova, who's on the phone somewhere, hi Adelina,
and Evan, hi,
and Evan, have been developing tools that I think fit that bill entirely. Mm-hmm. The more that involves lab work, the more that our thoughts, at least right now, and everything's a work in progress, our thoughts are, we want to make information to them available about two things. What tests are available, and what do they need to know as they turn to a lab that's skilled in performing those tests? What questions do they need to be able to ask to ensure that the research is being done properly? Unfortunately, there's a history of, you know, people not doing things properly.
Variable quality.
A variable quality. And we think that there are a series of questions, of principles that will help green chemists understand how to interpret the data and the proposed assays that they're asking people to do for them. But the more advanced tests, particularly the third and the fourth and the fifth tiers, always are going to be in the purview of environmental science.
And part of, as this becomes closer to prime time, to being ready for prime time, so to speak, part of that is we're talking about, you know, creating these networks. It's also making transparent who's doing what where, what biologists or what, you know, endocrinologists are doing what where. And in some sense, I mean, the degree to which one can also use wiki-like tools, you can also get feedback from the community as to, you know, whose work is good. Transparency is part of this.
Thanks, that's helpful. I'm particularly interested in when you're ready to release it, the list of, or not list, but discussion of questions and issues that chemists should be aware of when interpreting tests will be tremendously useful in our classes here.
Yeah.
Great.
You know, that's also, Marty asked that same question, just so you know, last week at GCD. It was funny. But with AGC and EHS, we're also starting to work with Beyond Benign in developing curriculum materials for chemists to explain toxicology and endocrine disruption sciences. So hopefully that will be forthcoming soon.
Perfect. Thanks.
Sure.
I have another question here. Are you interacting with, are you interacting with Europeans on this? That is your Science Advisory Board. REACH is looking to include EDCs in the future. How are you networking with our transatlantic colleagues?
Yes, we are interacting with Europeans on this, absolutely. We've been trying to be as inclusive as possible. We're also working with Canadians, and we're trying to work with some of our colleagues in Japan as well. Absolutely. Some of the most interesting work is being done in places other than the United States. Do we answer the question?
The advisory board, because of the frequency of the calls, for the Science Advisory Board, it was hard to have people join from distant time zones, but we had we've had a series of European chemists and environmental health scientists at the meetings where we all got together and spent serious time. Mm-hmm. And it, as Karen said, is a central part of what we want to do.
Okay, we also have a question from Al Ennis. Al, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you. A couple of things. I was wondering if you have a sense for how, if a chemist and team were to go through the entire series of phases, what the elapsed time, how much of an additional barrier to quote-unquote innovation or getting ideas developed. What's the picture for how long that would?
We're still fleshing out what the components are, so I can't answer that question with any degree of accuracy.
But is there sort of an expectation in industry among people developing materials for what the current standard is for getting things tested and sort of cleared, if you will?
This is a different standard than the current one. This is trying to push the testing upstream to very early in the design process for chemists who want to do it. So, you know, we don't in any sense imagine that every chemical company is going to want to do this, but there are going to be green chemists, part of whose central goal is to avoid endocrine disruption, who will go the extra mile to make this happen.
Yes.
How long that mile is, I don't know, because we're not.
Yeah. Chemists and their employers. Yeah.
Chemists and their employers.
Yeah. And I guess related was, I think you more or less answered that, but, you know, promoting this, the eventual protocol and trying to elevate it as a standard for developmental chemists, for green chemists, I guess. You know, is obviously that would be a long process and requiring a lot of voluntary uptake and all that. But have you started thinking about that, talking about it?
Well, we actually very purposefully included a number of green chemists in this process to give us feedback as we are moving forward. To give, and us includes them, so they're asking tough practical questions as we unfold. Right. Can I really do this? Can I afford to do this?
I would also
do I want to do this?
Remember, I mean, some of our people who are participating in the process have already jumped the line, as it were. Some of our colleagues working in academia who are working on things that will have commercial application, they've already started making use of these relationships.
And using tests.
And using the tests.
Doing assays.
So, I mean, the uptake of it is, yeah, it's voluntary, but it gives you back something that's pretty valuable. And if you're making something that is bio-based and sounds great, and it's got all this great sort of feel-good stuff about it, and then whoops, found out that actually it's a really nasty substance, that can save you a lot of time and money.
And while we can't go into details here, that's actually happened already.
It's happened already, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And here in Minnesota, we're working with some companies on some new greener chemistry product development, and their standard test, I think they, it's aquatic tox and a couple other things. It'd be interesting to chat with them or show them this presentation and get some feedback on how they think that might fit into their.
We are eager to get as much input from as many different quarters as we can. We are, to go back to the beginning, we're skeptical of having a design process that depends upon standardized assays, because it misses most of what's interesting and most of what's important. It gets a lot, but the analogy that I use sometimes is you think about those photographs from the Hubble Space Telescope. I know this sounds like it's a non sequitur, but think about those photographs and think about the process that you might go through if you were to say, wait a second, I go into my backyard with my binoculars and I don't see those Hubble space images. How could they possibly be true? Well, assays that have been around in standardized toxicology for 20 years, 30 years, are to use them to try and to test for the types of effects that are emerging in modern molecular genetic toxicology. They don't even come close to being able to do it. And we think that green chemists are going to want to have access to the very most current of assays.
Remember, we're not talking about toxicity in general. We're talking about endocrine disruption in particular.
Yes. Thanks for that reminder.
Sure.
It'd still be an interesting conversation with them.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
We're open to anything that can make this work better, sooner, faster, quicker, more effectively, we're open to it.
Well, thank you.
So, in kind of a follow-up to that question, Tracy Easthope says, is industry participating in the effort? Much research is going on within companies where they are bringing new chemicals to market on very short timelines. To what extent are they interested? Thanks.
Hi, Tracy. It's fun having so many people we know on this call. Is industry participating? It depends what you mean by industry. We have green chemists who are developing commercially relevant chemistries. We're not working with so much with industry groups, or we're not at that scale yet. And again, I know what you mean about things coming online in a very short timeline, and obviously no, they're not. Maybe they're not testing it to the degree that they should, and some of the replacements that are coming out for things that we all have discovered are problematic, like bisphenol A, et cetera, just to name one. Some of the replacements are looking as bad, if not maybe worse, even from a EDC perspective, if you look at, if you look close. So we're working with people who have connections to commercial application for chemistry, but we're not working at a broad scale with industry per se. It's too early. We're still working with the chemists or the environmental health scientists just to get the science right.
Karen, you're fading out a little. Are you done? I don't want to interrupt you.
No, my voice is dying because you're cold.
Oh, quit blaming it on me.
It's your fault, Lynn.
I have sort of a comment. I find this extremely interesting because having just participated in the ANSI standard Green Chemistry Institute standard setting process for what they're calling an information standard for greener chemicals and processes, endocrine disruptors did not make it into the standard itself, but were put in an annex because of the lack of standardized testing for endocrine disruptors. And I think the work that you're doing is really very interesting because in terms of, there was, a lot of debate as to what an endocrine disruptor actually is, and is there such a thing, and is it you know, how do you know whether a chemical is or not? You just go by list. And I'm hoping that the work that you're doing will offer an answer to some of that while not standardizing it in the way that they're talking about to test chemical characteristics. I'm really hoping that this kind of work will, you know, eventually be seen as a method for determining endocrine disrupting properties to the extent that they can be relied on, you know, by the producers of these chemicals and by the downstream users to you know, find its way into a standard to the extent that that's helpful.
Right.
So just wanted to add my 2 cents about that.
No, your 2 cents are right on, Lynn, and as I'm sure you know, that if that ANSI standard process had included more green chemists and more environmental health scientists and more endocrine disruptor specialists, maybe they would have come to a different conclusion. There may be a reason those folks weren't part of the team.